The morning fog clung tightly to the hills that encircled the small frontier village of Ash Hollow. It was a place carved from the earth by generations of settlers who prized obedience and silence over compassion. Among them lived a girl named Eliza, no older than 14, orphaned the previous winter when a sickness swept through the region and stole both her parents. With no siblings, no family, and no inheritance, Eliza was left at the mercy of a community that viewed weakness as a threat. She had always been a quiet child, watchful, obedient, gentle with animals and wildflowers alike, but that wasn't enough to protect her from the town's hunger for order and control. The people of Ash Hollow believed in harsh justice. Mercy was seen as dangerous. It created exceptions, and exceptions sowed disobedience. For an orphan girl with no protector, this was deadly. Rumors began after a traveling preacher came to town. That spring, the man, in his mid-30s, preached fire and brimstone, but behind closed doors, his eyes lingered too long on Eliza. One day, she returned home with her dress torn and her cheeks swollen, shaking with fear but silent. She didn't speak a word of what had happened. Whispers spread like wildfire. Witchcraft, one woman hissed. Promiscuity, said another. She tried to tempt him, the preacher sobbed, lying through his teeth. I resisted, but she's dangerous. No one asked Eliza. No one believed her. No one wanted to. It didn't take long for the townspeople to turn. They called a council under the guise of protecting the village's moral code. There was no trial, no chance for defense. The town elders decided she would be removed, not killed outright. That would offend the few in town who still feared. Divine judgment, but abandoned. Buried, just enough to make sure she wouldn't return. If she survived, it would be proof she was favored by God. If not, her sin would be erased from memory. Either way, it would be out of their hands. That evening, under cover of darkness, 3 men dragged her out of her small home. One held her arms. Another gagged her cries. The third her neighbor, Mr. Gatlin, a man she once helped when his child had a fever, shoveled the cold earth as if he were planting seeds, not digging a shallow grave for a living child. They didn't even say her name. To them, she had already stopped existing. The forest outside Ash Hollow was thick and unforgiving. Wolves sometimes howled in the distance. Bears passed through in the warmer months. But none of these wild things were as cruel as the men who lowered her into the pit. They didn't care that her hands trembled, or that she looked at them with wide, pleading eyes. They filled the hole anyway, dirt landing heavy against her chest, mouth, and hair. It was only the weight of their guilt, not mercy, that caused them to leave her with a thin pocket of air. Then they left. The woods fell silent, save for the rustling of wind and the faint whimpering coming from beneath the earth. Far beyond the village border, a lone hunter walked the shadowed trails of the forest. His name was Nokoma, a Cherokee man who had long left his people to live alone after losing his wife and son. Many settlers called him a ghost, a whisper, or a dangerous savage, but Nokoma was none of those things. He was a man broken by grief, living in harmony with nature. Avoiding the cruelty of men. He had tracked a wounded buck through the trees, noticing the unnatural quiet that had settled in a hollow north of the trail. The birds were gone. The wind had shifted. Something was wrong. Then he heard it faint, like a dream, a sound that made him stop in his tracks. A muffled gasp. A cry. He crouched low to the ground, his ear pressed to the soil. He felt a vibration. Someone was beneath the earth, acting. Quickly, Nokoma dug with bare hands, fingers raw and bleeding as he tore through dirt. He uncovered a hand small, limp, trembling. Then a face, caked with soil and tears. Eliza coughed, choking on air, eyes wide in disbelief. Nokoma lifted her out like one might lift a broken-winged bird. She was light as a breath and colder than the snow that blanketed the forest each winter. He wrapped her in his deerskin cloak and carried her back through the trees to his cabin hidden deep in the woods. She faded in and out of consciousness, whispering fragments of prayer and pleas. He didn't ask her questions, not yet. He simply lit the fire, fed her warm broth, and stayed awake all night to keep the nightmares at bay. By morning, Eliza was breathing steadily. Nokoma sat nearby, watching the girl sleep, his dark eyes filled with unspoken sorrow. He didn't know her story, but he recognized the pain in her soul. He had once carried it too, and just like that, the path of two broken people crossed, one who had been thrown away by a merciless world and one who had retreated from it. Neither knew it yet, but this night had changed everything. In the silence of the forest, a second chance had begun. The morning sun filtered weakly through the pines, its warmth barely touching the damp floor of the forest. In the safety of Nokoma's modest log cabin, the fire crackled softly. Its orange glow danced across the walls and flickered on Eliza's face, revealing how pale and fragile she still looked, more like a ghost than a girl. Nokoma, seated cross-legged on the wooden floor beside her, watched in silence. He had wrapped her wounds in cloth cloth, rubbed deer fat into her chapped lips, and covered her thin frame with every blanket he owned. Yet still she shivered. The fear clung to her like frost. It wasn't just the cold that had seeped into her bones, it was terror, betrayal, and grief. She hadn't spoken a full sentence. Not once, only fragments. Don't bury me, idea in single quotes, didn't do it. Her eyes opened briefly, locking onto Nokoma's. There was no trust in them, only confusion and dread. She flinched when he reached toward her with a carved wooden cup of water, her body still expecting cruelty. He pulled his hand back slowly and set the cup beside her. "No one will hurt you here," he said quietly. She didn't respond. Outside the cabin, the forest was alive with summer bird song and the rustle of wind. Nokoma stepped out, giving her space, but always listening. His bow rested on his shoulder, but he wasn't hunting now, he was thinking. He'd seen pain before. His own life had been shaped by it. Years ago, soldiers had come to his village in the dark of night, driven by greed and orders written by men who had never seen their faces. His wife, Aida, and his young son, Talai, had both died in the chaos. Since then, Nokoma had spoken little and trusted even less. He thought he had made peace with solitude, but now, fate had brought a child to his doorstep. A girl someone had tried to kill, buried alive like a secret. Her spirit wasn't just broken, it had been nearly erased. He couldn't turn his back on that. By midday, Eliza tried to sit up. She was weak, her arms trembling beneath her, but she didn't want to appear helpless. She had already learned what people did to helpless things. Nokoma noticed from the corner of his eye as he sharpened a flint knife outside. He waited until she had steadied herself, then quietly stepped inside and placed a warm bowl of cornbread mash and bone broth on the table. He didn't say a word. Eliza watched him. She didn't eat right away, unsure if it was a trick or a test. But her hunger eventually won. She took a bite, then another. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from the food, but from the strange realization that no one was yelling. No one was hitting her. No one was lying. After a few minutes, her small voice broke the silence. "Why'd you dig me up?" Nokoma looked at her and spoke without hesitation. "Because I heard the earth crying." Eliza stared at him. He wasn't mocking her. He meant it. Over the next few days, her body healed faster than her spirit. Nokoma didn't ask her for explanations. He spoke softly when needed and spent most of the day working nearby, chopping wood, mending snares, cleaning fish. He let her watch him. He showed her that not all men were dangerous. He taught through action. When he lit a fire, he invited her to help. When he tracked a rabbit, He explained the marks in the dirt. When he washed herbs in a stream, he offered her a handful to smell. Slowly, Eliza began to feel like she wasn't a prisoner, but a guest. One afternoon, while Nokoma was carving a feather from a piece of bone, she asked, "Are you a chief?" He chuckled for the first time. "No, just a hunter." "But you live alone," she said, as if it were strange. "Yes," he replied. But not always. Something about his answer felt familiar. She didn't ask more. Not yet. Each night, Nokoma told a story. Not about people, but about the forest. He told of the hawk who lost its wings but learned to run. Of the fox who cried at night but never stopped hunting. Of the bear who wandered too far and found a new home beyond the river. Eliza listened, curled in blankets by the fire. "Are they real?" she asked one night. "They are real enough," Nokoma said. "Sometimes stories are truer than facts." Eliza's lip trembled. She looked at her hands. "Can I be in a story like that?" Nokoma stared into the fire. "You already are." The next morning, Eliza stood in the doorway as Nokoma loaded firewood. For the first time, she stepped outside. The wind played in her hair. Birds circled overhead. The forest no longer felt like a grave, it felt alive. But as her eyes scanned the trees, she saw something that froze her blood. A symbol, carved faintly into a distant tree, a cross over a flame. She gasped and backed away, heart pounding. Nokoma turned. "What is it?" She didn't speak. She didn't have to. He followed her gaze, saw the mark, and his jaw tightened. It wasn't Cherokee. It was settler-born. And it wasn't a good sign. Someone had come close to the cabin recently and left a message. Nokoma didn't ask again. He reached for his bow and walked silently into the woods. Back inside, Eliza sat on the floor, knees to her chest. She was safe, yes, but safety could be temporary. Whoever had buried her might not be done. She knew they thought she was dead, but what would they do if they found out she wasn't? And more terrifying still, what would they do to the man who had saved her? As Nokoma disappeared into the trees, bow at the ready, Eliza realized that she wasn't just recovering. She was preparing. Sun was dipping low when Nokoma returned. His footsteps were silent, but Eliza had been watching the trees ever since he left. She sat on the cabin floor, her back pressed against the log wall, hugging a wool blanket tightly around her shoulders. Nokoma's face was grim. In his hand, he carried a broken twig with a strip of red cloth tied to it, an old settler's sign used for marking trails. Someone had passed near his land, recently, purposefully. Trouble? Eliza asked, her voice barely more than a breath. He nodded. Once. Not yet, but maybe soon. She swallowed hard and looked down. They'll come back for me, if they know I'm alive. I know, Nokoma said simply, then added, you won't face them alone. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. The fire crackled in the hearth. Shadows danced along the ceiling, stretching long and strange. Every gust of wind outside made her flinch. Every creak of wood sounded like footsteps. In the stillness of the room, she could hear her heartbeat racing. Her body had mostly healed, bruises fading, the cuts on her hands scabbing over, but inside she was still trapped in that cold grave, still gagged, still afraid to scream. Still, feeling the weight of dirt on her chest, choking the life out of her. Nokoma slept in the chair by the door, knife within reach. He never seemed to rest fully. Even in sleep, he looked alert. Eliza watched him, wondering why he had saved her, why he hadn't just left her there like everyone else did. He owed her nothing, didn't even know her name when he dug her out. But still, he had chosen to act. Why? She whispered into the dark. Nokoma stirred. Why what? Why did you help me? You didn't even know me. He sat up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. His eyes, wise and steady, met hers. Because someone once helped me when I had no one. Eliza didn't ask who. She saw the pain etched in his features. His past, like hers, was full of ghosts. In the days that followed, Nokoma became her guide not just through the forest, but through life again. He taught her to track deer by the shape of their hoof prints, and to listen for the rhythm of woodpeckers as a way to know where insects swarmed. He showed her which herbs helped ease pain and which ones to never touch. They spent hours near the stream behind the cabin, watching trout swim in patterns. Each lesson brought her closer to something she hadn't felt in a long time: control. Not everything reminded her of the grave anymore. She started to smile sometimes, timid and rare, like sun through storm clouds, but the healing wasn't smooth. One evening, Nokoma found her curled in the corner of the cabin, her hands clenched tightly around her neck. She was gasping for air, eyes wide with panic. "Eliza," he said calmly, kneeling beside her, "you're safe. Look at me." She couldn't. Her mind was elsewhere, back in the dirt, back in that moment when the soil filled her mouth, when her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might explode. Nokoma placed a hand gently over hers. "Breathe, like this." He inhaled slowly, then exhaled with a soft hum like the wind through trees. She followed, shaking, until her breaths began to even out. "It happens," he said, once she'd calmed. "Wounds inside take longer than the ones we can see." Her voice cracked. "I thought I died." "You didn't," he said. "You came back." Eliza began asking questions, slowly and cautiously. "Where did you live before here?" "With my people," he said, "in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Before soldiers burned it down. Do you ever miss them?" "Every day," Nokoma said. "They spoke late into the night sometimes." Eliza shared her memories in pieces, the scent of her mother's hair, her father's fiddle songs, the way the church bell rang on Sundays. Then she told him about the preacher, about the lie, about the night they dragged her away. Nokoma didn't interrupt. When she finished, his jaw was clenched, his eyes dark and full of fury, not at her, but for her. "You did nothing wrong," he said, "and they will answer for what they did." One morning, while gathering water, Eliza saw her reflection in the stream. The girl staring back was thinner, yes, and her eyes held sorrow, but she also saw strength. Her hair was tied back with a strip of leather Nokoma had given her. Her skin was no longer sickly pale. Her fingers were calloused from learning the bow and collecting firewood. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked alive, and that terrified her, because if she lived, it meant they might come looking. It meant she had to choose who she wanted to be. That afternoon, Nokoma handed her a carved wooden knife. "It's time you learned to protect yourself," he said. "I don't want to kill anyone," she said softly. "Protection is not about killing," he replied. "It's about choosing when not to run." They trained behind the cabin stances, reflexes, simple strikes. Eliza was awkward at first, but focused. Nokoma praised her patience more than her skill. "Anger makes your hands shake," he told her. "Breathe like a tree. Stand like a mountain." Day by day, she began to trust her body again. One night, as they sat near the fire, Nokoma handed her a small pouch. Inside was a single white feather, painted at the tip with a streak of red. "What is it?" she asked. "Balance," he said. "White for peace, red for blood. You carry both now." She held it tight in her hands, understanding what it meant. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone new, someone who wouldn't be buried again by anyone. Morning in the forest came gently, not with the blaring of bells or the shouting of neighbors, but with the quiet chorus of birds and the rustling of trees. Eliza had started waking up before sunrise, not from fear anymore, but from routine. She was learning how to live again, not just to exist, but to feel rooted like the trees around her. Each day, Nokoma introduced her to something new. Not all of it made sense at first, but he was patient, speaking in few but meaningful words. "This is cedar," he said, showing her how to tie small bundles of its leaves. "Good for the lungs. Good for the spirit." He let her make mistakes. When she tried to build a fire, it took 5 failed attempts before a single flame caught. She almost gave up. "You only fail if you stop trying," Nokoma told her. Those words stuck with her more than any others. In the evenings, he would sit beside the fire and share Cherokee stories, legends of the land, the animals, and the stars. He told her of the first woman who planted corn, of the thunder beings who protected the people, of the trickster rabbit who always got in trouble but always survived. "Why do all your stories have lessons?" she asked once, half smiling. "Because stories are how we remember who we are," he replied, "and who we must never become." She liked that. In the village, stories were always warnings, tales of hellfire, sin, and punishment. But here, stories felt like threads connecting her to something older and wiser than hate. One afternoon, Eliza was practicing with her wooden training knife when she spotted a deer grazing on the edge of the clearing. She stilled herself completely, watching how the animal's ears twitched at every sound. Its muscles, though relaxed, were ready to leap at the slightest sign of danger. Nokoma, watching from a distance, walked quietly up beside her. "You are like that deer," he said. "Careful, strong, learning how to move in a world that tried to kill you." Eliza said nothing, but her chest lifted slightly with pride. She was no longer afraid of the woods. She had learned to read the trees like pages in a book. She knew where the red mushrooms grew near the fallen birch logs. She knew which bird calls meant a storm was coming and which ones meant a predator was near. She even learned to fish using a hand-woven net Nokoma taught her to make from bark fibers. One day, she brought in 3 trout by herself. "Enough to feed both of us," she said with a small, proud smile. "You are no longer the same girl I found in the ground," Nokoma said, gutting the fish beside her. Her smile faded for a moment. "No," she said softly. "I buried her." The days in the forest were beginning to blend into one another, cool, misty mornings, long hours of learning, and firelit evenings filled with silence and slow healing. But in Eliza's mind, not everything stayed quiet. Her nightmares had returned. They came like wolves in the night, silent at first, then sharp and vicious. She'd jolt awake with a gasp, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. The image never changed. Dirt falling on her face, the scratch of a shovel, the sound of boots crunching leaves as they walked away. The air would grow tight in her chest. Sometimes she screamed. Other times she just cried into her blanket. Nokoma never said much during those nights, but she always found him nearby. He'd sit with her until her breathing slowed, sometimes placing a hand gently over hers, grounding her in the present. "You are not there anymore," he would whisper. "You are here." But she knew no matter how far they were from the village, part of her was still buried there. One morning, as she sat by the stream washing herbs, something caught her eye, a cluster of wildflowers, blue and delicate, just like the ones her mother used to plant outside their cabin. She reached for them, but as her fingers brushed the petals, a memory rushed over her like a river breaking its dam. She was back in the village, her mother's soft voice humming as she braided Eliza's hair, her father laughing in the distance as he chopped wood, and then another flash, her mother's body, cold and still, wrapped in cloth. Her father coughing up blood, too weak to even speak. That terrible winter. And the spring after. The preacher. The memory hit her like a blow, the smell of sweat and whiskey. His hand grabbing her wrist, her scream stifled, her torn dress. And then the lies, the whispers. the cold judgment in the eyes of those who had known her since she was a baby. She dropped the flowers, stumbled back, and fell to her knees. Later that day, Eliza sat silently outside the cabin, staring into the pine woods. Nokoma approached, his gaze steady. "You remembered," he said. She nodded. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "I wanted to forget, but I can't." "You're not supposed to forget," Nokoma said, sitting beside her. "Memory is a fire. It can burn you, but it can also light your way." She looked at him. "What do I do with it?" "Use it." That night, Eliza told him everything. The preacher's assault. The way he cried to the council and pretended to be the victim. The townspeople, too eager to believe him. The night they dragged her away. The sound of shovels. The dirt in her mouth. She spoke through tears, her voice shaking, but she didn't stop. Nokoma didn't interrupt. He simply listened. When she was done, he placed a burning cedar stick into the fire and said, "Now you are free of their silence." Eliza exhaled slowly. She felt like she had been holding her breath since the day she was buried. The next day, Nokoma handed her a piece of deer hide and a small brush made of pine needles. "Paint what you remember," he said. "I don't want to see it again." She said, "Then paint what comes after." So she did. With trembling hands, she painted a girl buried in the ground, but then she added roots growing from her feet, flowers blooming around her, a hawk soaring above. "What does it mean?" Nokoma asked once she finished. That she was meant to die, but something pulled her back. He nodded. Now she must choose why she lived. As the days passed, Eliza began to change again, but this time, it wasn't just healing. It was transformation. She began to speak with clarity and purpose. Her steps grew more confident. She hunted with Nokoma, helped skin the deer, even stitched her own leather gloves. She carved her own bow and learned to fire arrows. When she missed, she didn't cry. She tried again. She no longer recoiled at loud sounds, no longer jumped at shadows. And then one evening, while watching the fire, she asked a question Nokoma had known would come eventually. Why did they believe him? He didn't answer right away. Because fear is easier than truth. They feared what it would mean if he was the monster. So they made you the monster instead. She stared into the flames. If I go back, will they still see me that way? Maybe, maybe not, but they will see you. The wind changed that night. Eliza could feel it in her bones. The forest, once a place of safety, now hummed with a strange tension. Something was coming. She could feel it. She stood outside the cabin in the moonlight, the painted hide in her hands, her breath forming clouds in the cool air. I don't want to run anymore, she whispered. Nokoma came beside her. Then don't. Summer slipped into early autumn. The forest, once bursting with green, now glowed with fiery golds and deep reds. Leaves drifted down in slow, lazy spirals. The chill in the air had returned, not bitter yet, but sharp enough to remind Eliza that time was passing. She was no longer the girl who had been dragged from her home and buried in the dirt. That girl had died beneath the soil. The one who had emerged was different, older, quieter, stronger. Each morning, she and Nokoma rose before the sun. They moved through the woods like shadows, tracking deer, setting snares, foraging for mushrooms and wild roots. Eliza had grown lean, her arms stronger, her eyes sharper. Nokoma taught her how to read the land, how to respect it, how to listen. When the wind whispered things no human words could say, their bond had changed too. It was no longer built on survival or silence, but on mutual understanding. He didn't treat her like a child anymore. She didn't see him as a stranger. In the stillness of the trees, they became something like family. One crisp morning, as they sat by a small fire, Eliza carved a feather into a piece of wood. "What was your son's name?" she asked gently. Nokoma didn't look up from cleaning his knife. "Telai," he said. "It means red bird. He was 5. What happened to him?" Nokoma paused. "When the soldiers came," he said finally, "they didn't care who was in the way. My wife tried to run. She carried him. They were both shot." Eliza's hand stilled. "I'm sorry." He gave a faint nod, eyes distant. "I buried them under the cedar tree near the river. I come there when I forget who I am." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You saved me like you couldn't save them." His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. "You don't have to feel guilty for that," she whispered. Still, he didn't speak. But he didn't walk away either. And that, Eliza had learned, meant everything. That evening, they sat near the fire as the wind blew leaves against the cabin walls. Eliza leaned back against a log, holding the wooden stick Nokoma had once given her. "I want to carve something." "New," she said. He nodded. "What will you carve?" "A tree." "With roots?" "And fire at the base." He raised an eyebrow. "Fire?" "Fire nearly killed me," she said, "but it also lit my way." Nokoma smiled faintly, then carved both. Days passed with rhythm and purpose. They prepared for winter drying meats, storing herbs, reinforcing the cabin walls. Nokoma taught her how to set a smoke trap, how to read the stars, how to recognize animal tracks even after the snow fell. Eliza, in turn, began to teach herself how to forget the fear. She would walk further into the woods alone, sleep through the night without waking. Sometimes she even laughed a short, breathy thing, but it was real. She had found something here. Not just safety. She had found herself. One afternoon, while gathering water at the creek, Eliza spotted something strange on the opposite bank. A piece of fabric red, torn snagged on a bush dot. She froze. It was the same color as the preacher's sash. She knelt, heart pounding, and found something else, a boot print in the mud. Large, fresh, they were close. She sprinted back to the cabin, her mind racing. Nokoma was waiting. Before she could speak, he nodded. "I know. You saw him?" "No, but I smelled his tobacco last night. Someone has been circling the forest for days." Eliza clenched her fists. "He knows I'm alive." "Maybe, or maybe he just wants to be sure." She stepped closer. "Then let's show him." Nokoma stared at her, reading the steel in her voice. "You want to confront him?" "I want him to see I'm not afraid." He exhaled slowly. "You may not fear him, but he still has power. People still believe his lies. Then I'll make them see the truth." That night, Nokoma showed her how to make smoke signals. Not for the villagers, but for anyone watching. A symbol, a message. She lit the fire and watched the plumes rise into the moonlit sky. She didn't run. Any more dot, she made herself visible dot as the stars gathered overhead. Eliza sat by the fire and asked, "One final question. If I go back, what happens to us?" Nokoma didn't answer immediately. "You're not meant to stay in hiding," he said. "Your story is still being written." She looked down. "You're part of it." "So are the people who hurt you," he said. "But only you get to choose." "What comes next?" Eliza nodded, quiet. "I want to choose strength." Before they went inside, she placed her carved stick in the dirt by the fire. It stood like a marker, a declaration. A tree dot roots dot flames dot, and rising from it all, a hawk, wings wide, not dead. Not broken dot reborn dot. The days grew colder, and the wind now carried the scent of frost. Eliza moved through the forest with a hunter's grace, her feet quiet, her eyes sharp. But no matter how fast she moved, the past was gaining ground. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like it was holding its breath. Then, one morning, a visitor arrived, unexpected, dusty, and cautious. An old fur trader named Silas, who bartered goods with remote homesteads across the region. wandered into Nokoma's territory. Nokoma greeted him with guarded silence. Eliza stood nearby, half hidden among the trees, bow in hand. Silas took a long look at her. "Thought you was dead," he muttered. Eliza's heart froze. "You knew?" she asked. He nodded, wiping his mouth. "Heard it from Ash Hollow. They say you was buried for shaming the preacher. Whole village said God judged you." She stepped forward. "Do they know I'm alive?" Silas hesitated. "Not most. But the preacher? I'd wager he suspects. He's been sending folk out, asking questions, offering coin." Nokoma's expression turned to stone. "Why? To make sure you stay dead, I reckon." Later, around the fire, Eliza stared into the flames, her jaw clenched. "They're still spreading lies," she whispered. "They will until truth replaces them," Nokoma replied. "But how?" she asked. "How do I prove the truth to people who want to believe the lie?" He turned to her, voice steady. "You don't speak to their ears, Eliza. You speak to their guilt. You show them who you are and let shame do the rest." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with memories and rage. But beneath it all, a single thought began to rise. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. She wanted her name back. The next morning, she told Nokoma what she had decided. "I want to go back." He didn't try to stop her. "Won't return as a girl," he said. "You'll return as someone they tried to bury and failed." Preparing for the journey was unlike anything Eliza had done. Nokoma guided her through the rites of spiritual protection. He smeared ochre across her cheeks, tied a hawk feather into her hair, and carved a small talisman to wear around her neck. "You will walk through fire again," he said. "But this time, you will not burn." She packed light: herbs, a knife, her carved story stick, and courage. Lots of it. They traveled through the mountains over the course of 2 days. Eliza rode a borrowed mule. Nokoma moved silently beside her. As the village grew closer, so did her pulse. But not from fear. From readiness. On the third day, they crested a ridge. Below them, Ash Hollow spread out like a bruise in the valley. Familiar buildings, crooked fences, the same church bell that had once condemned her. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life had gone on without her, but that life was built on lies. And now she would unravel them. As they entered the edge of town, people turned. Some gasped. Others stared as if seeing a ghost. Eliza kept her eyes forward, walking tall. She didn't wear a dress or bonnet like the other girls. She wore moccasins, buckskin, and a braided sash across her chest. The wind caught the feather in her hair. She was no longer of Ash Hollow. She was something beyond it. A child cried, "Mama, it's the dead girl." The townsfolk whispered, some crossing themselves. The preacher, who had been standing on the church steps, dropped his Bible. His face turned white. Eliza stopped in the square. Her voice rang out. "I am Eliza May Carter. You left me in the dirt. You said I brought shame." She raised her hand, scarred, steady, alive. "But I lived, and now you must answer." The silence that followed was heavy. Nokoma stood behind her, his bow unstrung but visible. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was a warning. This girl was not alone. The preacher stepped forward, trying to recover his composure. "She's been corrupted," he said. "Taken by heathens. It's witchcraft." "No," Eliza interrupted. "It was you. You heard me. You lied. And they buried me because of you." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Silas, who had followed at a distance, stepped out from the crowd. "I remember that night. She was taken in secret. Never even got a hearing." An old woman, Mrs. Lonning, who had once brought Eliza soup during her fever, spoke softly. "My boy, he said he saw the preacher holding her down." The whispers became accusations. Faces turned. The lie was beginning to crack. The preacher's eyes darted around. You have no proof. Eliza pulled something from her satchel, the carved stick. She held it high. This is my proof. Every mark on this wood is what you took from me and what I took back. She pointed at him. You buried a child, and you told the town it was God's will. But you were the only sinner. Someone spit at the preacher's feet. Someone else stepped away from him. Ash Hollow was beginning to remember, and it didn't like what it saw that night. Eliza didn't stay. She didn't need to. She had returned, not for vengeance, but for her voice, and she had taken it back. The whispers of the past no longer haunted her. They haunted him now. As Nokoma and Eliza walked back toward the edge of the forest, she paused to look back one last time. The bell tower stood quiet. The preacher's house was dark. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like silence, and a truth, too, heavy to deny. Eliza didn't sleep the night after returning to Ash Hollow, not because of fear those chains had been broken, but because of what she saw in their eyes. Shame, shock, regret. The preacher had been unmasked, and yet no one had tried to stop her. No one dared defend him, but still. They hadn't spoken up either. Nokoma had told her once, fear makes men cowards. Guilt makes them silent. Now she understood both. As dawn touched the valley with golden light, Eliza and Nokoma returned, this time not to call out a man, but to challenge the people themselves. She walked to the village square again, her head held high. This time, she wasn't alone in the shadows. Curious faces peeked through curtains and gathered near porches. Some came willingly, others reluctantly. She stood in the exact spot where she declared herself alive the day before. Then she spoke. You let them bury me. Her voice was calm, steady, not bitter. But the truth cut deep anyway. You didn't ask questions. You didn't speak for me. I was 14, alone, and you turned your backs. Mrs. Lanning, the elderly woman who had once held Eliza as a baby, lowered her head. We were scared, she murmured. You were comfortable, Eliza said. And you let comfort decide what was right. Nokoma stood at the edge of the square, arms crossed. He didn't interfere. This was Eliza's fight now. She turned to the townspeople and continued. I don't want your apologies. I don't need your tears. What I want is truth. A silence fell over the crowd. Then a voice broke through. It was Caleb, a boy her age. He stepped forward, clutching his hat in both hands. I saw it, he said. The night the preacher dragged you behind the church. I heard you scream. I ran. He swallowed hard, eyes wet. I should have told someone. Eliza met his gaze. You were scared. I understand that. Another voice came. Sarah, the blacksmith's wife. They told us you tempted him, she said, eyes full of regret. But we all knew you. We raised you. Deep down, we knew it wasn't true. Eliza didn't reply. She didn't have to. The guilt was spreading like a slow burn. Then the mayor stepped forward. A man who'd cast the final vote to exile her. We were wrong, he admitted, and we need to make it right. Later that day, the townspeople gathered in the chapel, the same place the preacher had once used to cast judgment. But this time, Eliza stood at the front, not in chains or in shame, but in strength. The mayor stood beside her. From this day forward, the charges made against Eliza Carter are struck from record. Her exile, her burial, her silence, all were crimes against her. He turned to the villagers. We bear that shame together. They offered her land, a cottage, even a place among the village council. She declined them all. I don't need a home here, she said. I already found one. But she accepted something more important, her name. Before she left, she returned to the hill where her shallow grave had once been. Nokoma stood beside her in silence as she planted a cedar sapling in the soft earth. No one will forget now, she said. Not because of what happened to me, but because of what I became. She placed her carved story stick into the soil beside the tree. Her truth. Her proof. As they walked away from Ash Hollow for the final time, Nokoma finally spoke. You gave them something rare. Eliza glanced sideways. What's that? Grace, and the chance to become better. She nodded. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But at least now, they know what it means to see someone rise. That night, as they camped under the stars, Eliza lay awake by the fire, staring into the sky. She wasn't the orphan girl anymore. She wasn't the victim. She was the survivor who came back from the earth, and she was just getting started. Winds of early winter swept through the valley, carrying with them a kind of stillness that came only after a storm. Eliza and Nokoma had returned to the forest, back to the place that had cradled her when the world left her for dead. Ash Hollow was behind them, but the weight of her story remained. She stood near the creek, her reflection rippling in the water. The cedar sapling she'd planted over the grave was now far behind her, but the memory of that earth, of that cold darkness, would never fully leave. Yet she didn't fear it anymore. She had grown from it. Now, she wanted to do something more. With the life she had reclaimed, I want to tell my story, she said to Nokoma that morning. He looked at her with quiet thoughtfulness. To who? To others like me, girls who've been silenced, people left behind. I want them to know they're not alone. Nokoma nodded. Then you must return. Not to Ash Hollow, but to the world. They began traveling not to escape, but to share. From one settlement to the next, Eliza carried her carved story stick. She began to speak in circles of women, to frontier mothers, even to the occasional preacher's wife who lowered her head. In quiet understanding, she told them of fear, of betrayal, of dirt in her throat. And cold in her bones, she told them about the man who tried to destroy her. But she also told them about the man who saved her, a Cherokee hunter with grief in his eyes and kindness in his hands. A man who asked for nothing but gave everything. And slowly, her story began to ripple outward. One evening, in a settlement far west of Ash Hollow, a woman approached her after she spoke. She was trembling, clutching a child to her chest. I didn't stop them, she whispered, back in Ash Hollow. I was there. I heard you scream. I looked away. Eliza studied her. She recognized the face one of the preacher's followers, the one who'd said Eliza tempted the devil. I was afraid, the woman choked, but I've carried that moment with me every day. I told myself I didn't see it clearly, but I did. Eliza didn't speak right away. Then, softly, she said, "Thank you for remembering." The woman fell to her knees. "How can you forgive me?" "I didn't come to punish anyone," Eliza said. "I came so that girls like me aren't forgotten, and so that people like you stop hiding from the truth." The woman wept, holding her child close. Eliza placed a hand on her shoulder. "Just don't be silent again." With each new town, more stories came forward. Women who had been accused, exiled, shamed. Some never found justice. Some still lived in fear. But when they heard Eliza's story, something shifted. They saw proof that survival wasn't just possible, it was powerful. That truth could live even after being buried. In one small village near the mountains, a young Cherokee girl approached her. She didn't speak at first, just stared at Eliza's carved stick, the tree, the roots, the fire, the hawk. Then the girl asked, "Did it really happen?" Eliza looked her in the eyes. "Yes, every part." The girl nodded slowly. "My mother says the earth remembers everything, even the things people try to hide." "She's right," Eliza said. "But it also remembers the ones who came back." The girl touched the hawk etched into the wood. "Is that you?" "Yes," Eliza whispered. "It's all of us." As snow began to fall across the region, Nokoma and Eliza returned to the place where her journey began, the river bend where his family had once lived. The cedar tree where Aida and Talai rested stood strong, its branches catching flakes like blessings. Eliza knelt and placed a second story stick beside the roots. This one she had carved on her own, her new story, no longer defined by trauma, but by transformation. She turned to Nokoma. You saved me, but you also gave me a choice. You were always meant to choose, he said quietly. I chose to speak, she said. And now others are speaking too. As the fire crackled between them that night, Eliza felt something she had never known before. Not just safety, not just strength. She felt peace, not because she had forgotten, but because she had remembered and refused to stay buried. Years passed. The forest remembered her first before the world ever would. It remembered the girl who rose from the dirt and the man who found her, quiet as snowfall and strong as stone. Together, they had carved out a peace in a world that had once tried to erase them. But Eliza didn't vanish into the trees. She had work to do. In the years following her return to Ash Hollow, word of Eliza's survival traveled slowly but steadily. Stories spread beyond the valleys and mountains, first as whispers, then as truth. Women began carving their own story sticks, some modeled after hers. Symbols of pain, yes, but also of strength, survival, and rebirth. They called them Eliza branches. Some buried them beneath cedar trees. Others carried them close, tied with red string, and some carved hawks, always hawks. Eliza herself did not settle in one place. She traveled from town to town, not as a preacher or a teacher, but as a living story. People came to hear her speak. Some came to judge. Others came to confess. Everywhere she went, she asked one question. Who did they try to silence here? And slowly, the world began to answer. She helped a group of women found a refuge hidden deep in the woods, a place for girls who had been cast out. They named it Fireroot. It became more than shelter. It became resistance, healing. Family. Girls who were once called shameful learned to track, to carve, to hunt, to heal. They wrote their stories, painted their truths, sang songs that had been buried under church steps and courthouse stones. Some stayed, some returned, home stronger, but none left the way they came. Nokoma remained by her side through every mile, every fire, every storm. As she became a voice for the voiceless, he stayed just behind her, not as her shadow, but as her roots. He taught the girls how to survive in the wild, but also how to listen to it. He taught them silence was not weakness, and watching was not submission. When the girls at Fireroot asked him why he helped, he would say, because once I buried my family, and then the forest gave me another. As Eliza grew older, she never forgot the hill where they buried her. Every year, she returned and planted something, a cedar, a wild rose. One year, just a feather tied to a branch. She never needed a grave of her own. The earth had already held her once. She wanted her legacy to rise, not fall. When the preacher finally died alone and disgraced in a cold cell after others came forward, Eliza didn't celebrate. She didn't go to his trial. She didn't speak his name again. He had taken so much from her, but he would not have her peace. One winter evening, after many seasons of travel, Eliza returned to Nokoma's cabin, weathered but still standing. He was older now, slower, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. You always return with the snow, he said. She smiled. Because snow remembers where it's fallen. They sat by the fire, sharing stories, the silence between them soft and warm. She told him about a girl in the southern hills who sang the truth of her own exile. About a boy who carved his shame into bark, then burned it in front of the village that cursed him, and about a woman who had once tried to bury her guilt, but had instead planted wildflowers where Eliza had once laid. He listened, eyes closed. Nodding. Then he handed her something, his story stick. I carved it long ago, he said, but I never finished it. You finish it. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. I will. When Nokoma passed away quietly in the spring, Eliza buried him beside Aita and Talai under the cedar tree by the river. No coffin, no stone. Just a carved hawk feather in the soil. And her tears. Years later, when Eliza's own steps slowed and her hair turned white like the frost of early dawn, people still told her story. Not of the girl who was buried, but of the woman who rose, the woman who carried her scars like shields, who turned silence into song, who made others believe that survival was not just endurance, it was a gift, meant to be passed on. And when Eliza finally lay down beneath the sky for the last time, her carved stick lay beside her, a tree, a fire. Hawk. And underneath it all, a girl reaching out of the soil not to escape, but to bloom.